You didn't choose your name. You didn't choose your country, your language, or the face you see in the mirror. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. You may not have chosen your personality either. The version of you that gets nervous at parties, that chases novelty, that needs order, that feels everything too deeply. That version may have been written long before your first breath. And the science behind it is stranger than you think. Picture the moment you were born. You arrive with no memories, no habits, no opinions. A blank slate, right? That's what philosophers believed for centuries. John Locke called it the tabula rasa, the empty tablet. The idea was simple. Experience writes on you. The world shapes you. Who you become is entirely a product of what happens to you. It's a comforting idea. It means everything is fixable. Everything is learnable. You are infinitely moldable. But what if that idea is wrong? In 1956, a researcher named Alexander Thomas partnered with psychiatrist Stella Chess and began one of the most important studies in the history of developmental psychology. They started tracking 141 infants, newborns, from the first weeks of life. They weren't interested in what these babies would learn. They were interested in how these babies already behaved, their activity level, their emotional intensity, how they reacted to a new face, a new sound, a new texture. Then they kept watching, for decades. By the time these children were teenagers, something remarkable had emerged. The patterns they showed in the cradle, the ones that existed before language, before memory, before socialization, were still visible. Some children who had been fussy and slow to adapt as infants were anxious and cautious as adolescents. Children who had been bold and energetic as babies were explorers and risk-takers as teens. Thomas and Chess called these early patterns temperament. And temperament, they argued, is not learned. It arrives with you. But where does it come from? Your DNA contains approximately 3 billion base pairs. Inside that code is not just a blueprint for your body, your height, your eye color, the shape of your nose, but also a rough draft of your nervous system's default settings. How reactive your amygdala is. How quickly your dopamine system responds to novelty. How much cortisol your body floods into your bloodstream when something feels threatening. These are not metaphors. These are measurable biological differences that exist between people from the very beginning. Researcher Jerome Kagan spent decades studying what he called high-reactive and low-reactive infants at Harvard. He would bring 4-month-old babies into a lab and expose them to new stimuli, colorful mobiles, recorded voices, unfamiliar smells. Some babies barely reacted, calm, still, curious. Others arched their backs, kicked their legs, and cried. High reactive. Kagan then followed these same children for years. The high reactive infants, the ones who responded intensely to novelty at 4 months, were significantly more likely to become inhibited, cautious, and anxious children. The low-reactive infants were more likely to become bold, sociable, and comfortable with the unfamiliar. What Kagan was watching, in real time, was temperament becoming personality. Now, here is where it gets truly strange, because this is not just happening inside one lifetime. It is happening across generations. Behavioral geneticists have spent decades studying twins, identical twins raised apart, fraternal twins raised together, to try to separate what nature gives you from what nurture builds. The results have upended almost everything psychologists once believed about personality. Robert Plomin at King's College London has spent a career synthesizing this data. His conclusion is stark. Across nearly every measurable trait, introversion, conscientiousness, emotional stability, openness to new experience, agreeableness, The genetic contribution to personality hovers somewhere between 40 and 60%, sometimes higher, 40 to 60%. That means roughly half of who you are was already there in your cells before the world ever got a chance to touch you. Think about that for a moment. Half. But it is not as simple as one gene for shyness or one gene for ambition. What your DNA actually encodes is more subtle than that. It encodes the sensitivity of your stress response, the baseline activity of your reward circuits, the speed at which your nervous system processes threat versus opportunity. These are not traits. They are tendencies. They are the slope of the hill your personality rolls down. And then the environment, your family, your culture, your early experiences, determines how far and how fast you roll. This is what psychologists now call the diathesis stress model. You arrive with a predisposition, a biological leaning, and the world either amplifies it or dampens it. A child born with a highly reactive stress system who grows up in a calm, predictable, loving environment may develop into someone who is simply careful and empathetic. That same child, placed into chaos and threat, may develop into someone crushed by anxiety. The raw material is the same. The outcome diverges. And here is the counterintuitive twist that most people never hear. The environment shapes you far less than researchers once expected, but not in the way you might think. The shared environment, meaning the household you grew up in, the parenting style you were raised with, the family dinners and rules and traditions. That shared environment accounts for surprisingly little of adult personality, almost nothing in some studies. What matters more is the non-shared environment, the experiences that were unique to you, the friend group you found, the teacher who saw something in you, the moment you failed publicly and had to decide who you were going to be on the other side of it. These individual experiences interact with your pre-existing temperament and produce something genuinely yours. So the picture that emerges is not nature versus nurture. It is nature via nurture. Your biology sets a range. Your life determines where inside that range you land. There is a researcher named David Licken who studied twins for decades at the University of Minnesota. He introduced a concept he called the set point of happiness, the idea that each person has a baseline level of well-being that they tend to return to, regardless of what happens to them. Win the lottery. Return to your set point. Suffer a terrible loss. Return to your set point. The elasticity is real, but the anchor is biological. Licken was not saying your life doesn't matter. He was saying that the center of gravity was already inside you before anything happened. Now, step back further, because this is where the story gets ancient. The temperament traits that researchers measure today, boldness, caution, novelty-seeking, threat sensitivity, are not modern inventions. They are not products of civilization or culture. Primatologists have observed the same personality variation in chimpanzees, in rhesus monkeys, in octopuses. Yes, octopuses. Individual octopuses show consistent differences in boldness and curiosity across their lifetimes. The variation is old, far older than the human species. Why would evolution preserve personality variation? Why not optimize everyone toward the same successful traits? Because different environments reward different strategies. In a stable, resource-rich environment, the bold explorer does well. In a dangerous, unpredictable environment, the cautious observer survives longer. A group of humans with varied temperaments is more resilient than a group of identical ones. The variation itself is the evolutionary advantage. You did not choose your temperament, but your temperament is not a flaw. It is a strategy. an ancient, field-tested strategy for navigating a world that has never been entirely safe. So what does this mean for you right now? It means that the version of you that flinches at conflict or runs toward it. The version that needs silence to think or needs noise to feel alive. The version that carries guilt too long or shakes things off faster than you think is decent. That version was not an accident. It was not a mistake your parents made, or a weakness you developed, or a habit you failed to break. It is, in the most literal biological sense, something you arrived with. That does not mean it cannot change. Neuroplasticity is real. Therapy works. Experience reshapes the brain in measurable ways. The slope can be redirected. But the slope was always there. And here is what that changes, if you let it. When you look at another person, someone whose personality baffles or frustrates you, someone whose reactions seem alien or excessive, you're not looking at a series of choices they made. You're looking at a nervous system that arrived pre-tuned to a different frequency than yours. A system that has been running its particular program since before language, since before memory, since before the first moment either of you knew your own name. You didn't choose your name. You didn't choose your country, your language, or the face you see in the mirror. And you may not have chosen the version of you that woke up this morning, cautious or bold, open or guarded, easily moved or carefully contained. But that version has been navigating the world on your behalf for your entire life. It was written before you arrived, and it has been yours ever since.